My name is Melody Harper, and I'm 26 years old. 3 weeks before my brother's wedding, I sat at my parents' dinner table listening to the most devastating words I'd ever heard. "Melody, we think it's better if you're not at Tyler's wedding," my mother Linda said, not even looking up from her meatloaf. My father Robert nodded in agreement while cutting his food. "You've gained weight since losing your job, and honestly, you'd just be embarrassing for the photos." Tyler, my golden child brother, shrugged and said, "Jessica agrees. It's our special day." That's when I discovered they'd already sent out revised guest lists. Before we dive into this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button if you've ever felt like the family disappointment, and don't forget to subscribe because this story gets absolutely wild. Trust me, you won't believe what happened when I decided to show up anyway. Growing up in the Harper household meant living in Tyler's shadow every single day of my existence. From the moment he could walk, my parents treated him like he was destined for greatness while I was merely an afterthought. When Tyler scored his first soccer goal at age 5, my parents threw a backyard party and invited half the neighborhood to celebrate. When I made honor roll the same week, they barely glanced up from the newspaper. This pattern continued throughout our entire childhood, creating a dynamic that would shape both our lives in ways I'm only now beginning to understand. The favoritism was so obvious that even our extended family noticed it, though nobody ever said anything directly. During family gatherings, my parents would spend 20 minutes bragging about Tyler's latest achievement while glossing over anything I accomplished with a quick "oh," and Melody's doing fine too. When Tyler needed school supplies, money appeared instantly. When I asked for help with college applications, I was told to figure it out myself because they were busy helping Tyler with his scholarship essays. Tyler received a full ride to State University for his business degree, funded not just by his academic achievements but also by our parents' financial support for his extracurricular activities and test prep courses. Meanwhile, when I applied to colleges, my parents claimed there simply wasn't money available to help me. I worked 3 part-time jobs throughout high school just to save enough for community college, eventually dropping out after 2 years because I couldn't balance work and studies while supporting myself completely. The comparing never stopped, even as we became adults. Every family dinner included some variation of "why can't you be more like Tyler?" When Tyler landed his first corporate job, my parents threw him a graduation party and gave him a down payment for his apartment. When I finally found steady work at a marketing firm, they asked when I planned to pay them back for letting me live at home during community college. The double standard was so ingrained in our family dynamic that I started believing maybe I really was the problem. My struggles seemed to multiply while Tyler's successes mounted effortlessly. I went through a series of failed relationships, partly because I had such low self-esteem from years of family criticism. My parents would make comments about how I picked the wrong type of men while simultaneously setting Tyler up with daughters of their friends. When Tyler started dating Jessica, a successful attorney from a prominent family, my parents practically adopted her as their second daughter before the engagement was even official. The job loss that triggered this whole wedding situation happened 6 months ago when my marketing firm went through massive layoffs due to economic pressures. Despite my solid performance reviews and client relationships, I was among the casualties simply due to seniority rules. The depression that followed led to emotional eating and a 30-pound weight gain, which became my family's latest ammunition against me. Instead of offering support during this difficult period, my parents treated my appearance change as a personal embarrassment. Family gatherings became increasingly uncomfortable as my parents would make subtle digs about my weight gain while praising Tyler's promotion to senior analyst and his engagement to Jessica. They would suggest I try this diet or that exercise program, always framing their criticism as concern for my health. Meanwhile, Tyler would sit there saying nothing, never once defending me or acknowledging how unfairly our parents treated me. His silence felt like approval of their behavior. The tension escalated dramatically as Tyler's wedding approached. My parents became obsessed with every detail being perfect, constantly worrying about what their friends and colleagues would think. They hired a professional wedding coordinator and spared no expense on flowers, catering, and venue decorations. During planning discussions, I noticed my role in the ceremony becoming smaller and smaller until I was essentially just another guest instead of the sister of the groom. Jessica, Tyler's fiancée, seemed to encourage this dynamic by constantly praising my parents for raising such a successful son while making pointed comments about how challenging it must be to have children with such different outcomes. She would suggest family photos that somehow excluded me or recommend restaurants for family dinners that she knew I couldn't afford. Her influence over my parents was obvious, and they clearly preferred her opinions to mine on every subject. The breaking point came during what was supposed to be a casual family dinner 3 weeks before the wedding. I had been looking forward to spending time with everyone and maybe rebuilding some connections before the big day. Instead, I walked into an ambush where my parents had clearly rehearsed their devastating announcement. The casual cruelty of their delivery, treating my exclusion from my own brother's wedding like a minor scheduling conflict, revealed just how little they valued my feelings or my place in the family. The morning after my parents delivered their crushing blow about the wedding, I couldn't sleep and found myself wandering around their house while they were at work. I had stayed overnight, hoping we might have a follow-up conversation where they'd realize how hurtful they'd been. Instead, I discovered something that would change everything I thought I knew about my family's financial situation and my own struggles. While looking for old photo albums in my father's study, hoping to remind myself of happier family memories, I accidentally knocked over a stack of papers behind his desk. As I bent down to collect them, I noticed bank statements and legal documents that caught my attention. My grandmother had passed away 3 years ago, and I remembered my parents telling me that she'd left everything to them with instructions to help both Tyler and me when we needed it. What I discovered in those papers told a completely different story. The documents revealed that my grandmother's will specifically stated that her inheritance should be divided equally between Tyler and me, with our parents serving as trustees until we each turned 25. The total inheritance was substantial, nearly $200,000, which meant Tyler and I should have each received $100,000. According to the bank statements, Tyler had received his full portion plus additional funds for his college education, business startup costs, and even the down payment on his current apartment. My portion of the inheritance had been systematically drained over the past 3 years, with large withdrawals labeled as educational expenses for Melody and living support for Melody. The problem was, I had never seen a single dollar of that money. Every withdrawal happened during periods when I was struggling financially and asking my parents for help, only to be told that money was tight and I needed to be more self-sufficient. They had been stealing from my inheritance while watching me work multiple jobs and struggle with student loans. The legal documents were even more damning. My grandmother's handwritten letter to the lawyer expressed specific concerns about my father's tendency to favor Tyler and included explicit instructions that both grandchildren should receive equal treatment. She had even established the inheritance structure specifically to prevent the kind of favoritism that had characterized my childhood. Reading her words about wanting to ensure I had the same opportunities as Tyler brought tears to my eyes, knowing that her wishes had been completely disregarded. As I dug deeper through the files, I found evidence of even more financial manipulation. My parents had used my social security number to open credit cards and take out loans, apparently to cover the money they'd borrowed from my inheritance. They had been making minimum payments on debt taken out in my name while using the borrowed funds for Tyler's benefit. This explained why my credit score was mysteriously lower than expected when I tried to get my own apartment after college. The bank statements showed regular transfers from my inheritance account to cover Tyler's expenses long after he was financially stable and earning a good salary. Even his engagement ring for Jessica had been partially funded with money that rightfully belonged to me. Every advantage he'd enjoyed, every opportunity that had been presented as evidence of his superior character and work ethic, had been subsidized by stealing from my future. I carefully photographed every document with my phone, making sure to capture account numbers, dates, and signatures. The evidence was overwhelming and clearly showed a pattern of fraud that had been ongoing for years. My hands were shaking as I realized the scope of what my parents had done and how their theft had directly contributed to my struggles while funding Tyler's success story. The cruelest part was discovering my grandmother's personal letters expressing her love for both Tyler and me equally. She had specifically mentioned wanting to ensure that I would have financial security despite what she diplomatically called family dynamics that might work against Melody's interests. She had seen the favoritism even when I was too young to fully understand it, and she had tried to protect me from beyond the grave. The timing of these discoveries felt like more than coincidence. My parents' decision to exclude me from Tyler's wedding suddenly made perfect sense as part of a larger pattern of erasing me from the family narrative. They couldn't risk having other family members ask too many questions about why Tyler was thriving while I struggled, especially if those relatives remembered my grandmother's intention to provide equally for both of us. I spent the rest of that day carefully documenting everything I'd found and researching my legal options online. The evidence was clear that my parents had committed serious financial crimes, including identity theft and fraud. More importantly, I realized that my years of believing I was simply less capable or deserving than Tyler had been based on a lie. My struggles weren't character flaws or personal failures, they were the direct result of systematic sabotage by the people who were supposed to support me most. Armed with the knowledge of my parents' financial theft, I began paying closer attention to their behavior and discovered that the wedding exclusion was just the tip of the iceberg. Over the next few days, I learned that the conspiracy against me went much deeper than I had imagined and involved not just my parents but Tyler and Jessica as active participants in a calculated campaign to erase me from family history. The first revelation came when I overheard my mother on the phone with my Aunt Catherine, my father's sister. My mother was explaining that I was going through a difficult mental health crisis and might not be attending the wedding due to my unstable condition. She painted a picture of me as someone who had become unreliable and potentially disruptive, suggesting that my absence was for everyone's protection rather than their choice. The way she lied so smoothly while I listened from the next room was chilling. I decided to call some of our extended family members myself to see what stories were circulating about me. What I discovered was that my parents had been spreading a narrative for months about my supposed psychological problems and erratic behavior. Cousins who had always been close to me suddenly seemed hesitant and concerned when I spoke with them, clearly influenced by whatever my parents had been saying behind my back. The wedding planning betrayal ran even deeper than I initially realized. Through social media and conversations with family friends, I learned that I had originally been chosen as Tyler's maid of honor when he first got engaged. Tyler had apparently told several people that he wanted me in that role because we had been close as children, despite our parents' favoritism. However, Jessica had systematically campaigned to have me removed from the wedding party entirely. Jessica's campaign against me was methodical and vicious. She had convinced Tyler that having me as maid of honor would be awkward because of my weight gain and employment situation. She suggested that his successful friends from college would be better choices for groomsmen because they would photograph better and make Tyler look more successful. She even went so far as to research unflattering photos of me from social media to show Tyler how I might ruin their professional wedding photographs. The group chat messages I discovered were devastating in their casual cruelty. Tyler, Jessica, and my parents had been sharing jokes about my appearance and life failures for months. They referred to me as the problem child and made bets about whether I would have another breakdown before the wedding. Jessica had even suggested that they should change the locks on my parents' house after the wedding to prevent me from showing up uninvited and causing scenes in the future. My parents' financial planning around the wedding revealed another layer of betrayal. They had borrowed additional money using my identity to help pay for wedding expenses, essentially making me financially responsible for an event I wasn't even invited to attend. The irony was staggering. They were using my credit to fund a celebration of Tyler's happiness while simultaneously excluding me from participating in that happiness. The venue coordination was particularly painful to discover. Jessica had specifically requested that the seating chart be designed to minimize questions about my absence. They had arranged for family members who might ask about me to be seated far from my parents' table, and they had prepared explanations about my travel difficulties to deflect any inquiries. The level of planning that went into erasing me from the event was almost impressive in its thoroughness. Tyler's role in this conspiracy was perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect. Through old text messages and conversations with mutual friends, I learned that he had initially wanted to include me in the wedding planning and had even suggested that Jessica and I might become closer through the process. However, Jessica's influence had gradually turned him against me, convincing him that I was jealous of his success and would somehow sabotage their special day if given the opportunity. The transformation of Tyler's attitude toward me had been gradual but complete. Friends who had known us both since childhood mentioned that Tyler now spoke about me with embarrassment, describing me as the family member who never got her life together. He had apparently told his college friends that I was unreliable and had always been jealous of his achievements, rewriting our childhood history to fit the narrative that Jessica preferred. The most devastating discovery was a conversation between Tyler and Jessica that a mutual friend accidentally overheard at a party. Tyler had said that excluding me from the wedding was actually doing me a favor because I would be too embarrassed by my appearance to enjoy myself anyway. Jessica had responded by saying that my absence would make the whole event more elegant and sophisticated, without the family drama that my presence might create. My parents' justification for their behavior was equally revealing. They had convinced themselves that they were protecting Tyler's reputation and future prospects by distancing the family from my perceived failures. In their minds, my struggles reflected poorly on their parenting, while Tyler's success validated their methods. By erasing me from significant family events, they could present themselves as parents who had raised a successful child rather than parents dealing with one success and one disappointment. The coordination between all three of them was sophisticated enough to suggest months of planning. They had synchronized their stories, prepared explanations for my absence, and even coordinated their social media posts to exclude any recent photos of me. The wedding wasn't just about celebrating Tyler and Jessica's union, it had become a formal ceremony for casting me out of the family entirely. Just when I felt most isolated and overwhelmed by the scope of my family's betrayal, an unexpected phone call changed everything. My Aunt Catherine, my father's sister, contacted me 3 days after I discovered the financial documents. Her timing seemed miraculous, but I soon learned that she had been watching my family's dynamics for years and had finally decided to take action. Catherine's call came at 7 in the morning while I was sitting in my apartment, staring at printed copies of the bank statements and trying to figure out what to do next. Her voice was cautious but determined as she said, "Melody, I need to ask you something directly. Has your father been telling the truth about your grandmother's inheritance?" The question hit me like a lightning bolt because it meant she had been suspicious all along. My aunt explained that she had never believed my father's stories about my grandmother leaving everything to my parents with vague instructions to help the grandchildren when appropriate. Catherine remembered specific conversations with my grandmother about ensuring both Tyler and I received equal treatment, and she had been waiting for evidence of what she suspected was financial manipulation. My grandmother had apparently confided her concerns about Robert's favoritism to Catherine shortly before her death. Catherine revealed that she had been deliberately excluded from family events for the past 2 years because she had asked too many pointed questions about my grandmother's estate and Tyler's sudden financial advantages. When she inquired about whether I had received my inheritance, my parents had told her I was too irresponsible to handle money and that they were managing my portion until I matured enough to deserve it. These explanations had never sat well with Catherine, who remembered me as responsible and hardworking even as a teenager. The conversation became emotional as Catherine apologized for not acting sooner on her suspicions. She explained that she had been gathering her own evidence and waiting for the right moment to intervene, not knowing how severe the situation had become. When she heard through family friends that I wasn't invited to Tyler's wedding, she realized that my parents' behavior had escalated beyond mere favoritism into active cruelty. Catherine's support was both practical and emotional in ways I desperately needed. She offered to drive to my apartment immediately to review the evidence I had gathered and help me understand my legal options. More importantly, she validated my perceptions about my family's treatment and assured me that I wasn't imagining the favoritism or overreacting to normal family dynamics. Having an adult family member acknowledge what I had experienced felt like emerging from years of gaslighting. When Catherine arrived at my apartment and saw the financial documents I had discovered, her reaction confirmed the severity of what my parents had done. She immediately recognized several transactions as fraudulent and pointed out legal violations I hadn't even noticed. As someone who worked in banking, she could explain exactly how my parents had manipulated various accounts and why their actions constituted serious crimes rather than mere family disputes. Catherine also brought her own evidence to our meeting. She had copies of my grandmother's original will and estate planning documents, which she had requested from the family lawyer after becoming suspicious about my father's handling of the inheritance. These official documents proved that my interpretation of my grandmother's intentions was completely accurate and that my parents had violated both the legal terms of the will and my grandmother's explicit written instructions. The most powerful evidence Catherine provided was a series of letters my grandmother had written to her expressing specific concerns about Robert's treatment of me. In these letters, my grandmother detailed instances of favoritism she had witnessed and her fears that I would be disadvantaged throughout my life unless she took steps to ensure my financial security. Reading my grandmother's words about loving Tyler and me equally while worrying about my future brought both comfort and grief. Catherine's professional knowledge proved invaluable in understanding the scope of my parents' crimes. She explained that identity theft, inheritance fraud, and financial elder abuse were serious federal offenses that could result in significant criminal penalties. More importantly for my immediate situation, she assured me that the stolen money could be recovered with interest and damages through both criminal prosecution and civil litigation. Together, we developed a comprehensive plan for gathering additional evidence and presenting our findings to law enforcement and an attorney. Catherine offered to fund my legal expenses and serve as a witness to both my grandmother's intentions and the suspicious changes in my parents' behavior after her death. Having someone with banking expertise and family knowledge supporting my case made me feel confident for the first time in months. Catherine also provided crucial emotional support by sharing her own observations of my family's dynamics over the years. She confirmed that my grandmother had often expressed frustration about Robert's favoritism toward Tyler and had specifically designed her inheritance structure to counteract that bias. Knowing that my grandmother had seen and worried about the same treatment I experienced validated my feelings and helped me understand that I hadn't been imagining or exaggerating my family's behavior. The timing of Catherine's intervention felt providential, but she explained that she had been planning to contact me regardless of the wedding situation. My parents' decision to exclude me from such a significant family event had simply accelerated her timeline for taking action. She assured me that even if I had never discovered the financial documents, she would have eventually approached me with her suspicions and evidence. Our partnership transformed my situation from feeling helpless and isolated to having a powerful ally with resources and knowledge. Catherine's support gave me both the practical tools and emotional strength I needed to confront my family's decades of abuse and theft. For the first time in my life, I had an adult family member who was completely on my side and willing to fight for justice on my behalf. With Catherine's support and evidence in hand, I began the most transformative period of my life. Instead of wallowing in self-pity about my family's betrayal, I channeled my anger and hurt into a systematic campaign to rebuild myself while building an airtight case against my parents. The next 2 weeks became a whirlwind of legal consultations, personal development, and strategic planning that would ultimately change everything. The first step was finding a qualified attorney who specialized in inheritance fraud and identity theft. Catherine accompanied me to several consultations until we found a lawyer who immediately understood the severity of my parents' crimes and the strength of our evidence. The attorney, Jonathan Mills, explained that my parents had committed multiple felonies and that both criminal prosecution and substantial civil damages were likely outcomes if we proceeded with legal action. Jonathan's analysis of the financial documents was thorough and damning. He confirmed that my parents had stolen approximately $120,000 from my inheritance, used my identity to obtain credit without my knowledge, and systematically defrauded me over a period of 3 years. The evidence was so clear-cut that he offered to take the case on a contingency basis, meaning I wouldn't pay attorney fees unless we recovered money through legal action. While building the legal case, I also decided to invest in rebuilding myself physically and emotionally. Using some of my remaining savings, I hired a personal trainer and nutritionist to help me address the weight gain that had become my family's latest weapon against me. However, my motivation wasn't to please my parents or prove I deserved their acceptance. Instead, I wanted to feel strong and confident when I eventually confronted them about their crimes. The therapy component of my transformation was equally important. I found a psychologist who specialized in family trauma and emotional abuse, and our sessions helped me understand how decades of gaslighting and favoritism had shaped my self-perception. Learning about narcissistic family dynamics and scapegoating patterns helped me realize that my struggles weren't personal failures but predictable outcomes of systematic abuse. Meanwhile, I began documenting additional evidence of my parents' ongoing manipulation and cruelty. I started recording our phone conversations and saving text messages that revealed their continued attempts to manipulate and control me. The recordings captured my parents demanding that I contribute money to Tyler's wedding expenses despite excluding me from the event, demonstrating their sense of entitlement to my resources even while treating me as disposable. My professional life also underwent a dramatic transformation during this period. Using the marketing skills from my previous job, I started a freelance consultancy focusing on small business digital marketing. My first clients were impressed with my work, and word-of-mouth referrals began generating steady income within the first month. The financial independence felt empowering after years of struggling and asking my parents for help that never materialized. The business success was particularly satisfying because it proved that my professional struggles had been circumstantial rather than indicative of my abilities. With the depression lifting and my confidence growing, I found myself capable of the kind of focused, creative work that had always been my strength. Client testimonials and growing revenue provided external validation that my family's assessment of my capabilities had been completely wrong. Tyler and Jessica's continued cruelty during this period actually strengthened my resolve rather than discouraging me. They sent mocking text messages about my absence from wedding planning events and made jokes about my appearance when they thought I couldn't hear them. However, instead of internalizing their criticism as I had done for years, I now recognized their behavior as evidence of their own insecurity and moral poverty. My parents escalated their demands for money as the wedding approached, apparently viewing me as a convenient source of funding for last-minute expenses. When I politely declined to contribute, they became increasingly aggressive and manipulative in their requests. These interactions, which I carefully recorded, revealed the transactional nature of their relationship with me and provided additional evidence of their exploitative mindset. The physical transformation was remarkable, but more importantly, my entire demeanor began changing as I gained strength and confidence. The combination of regular exercise, proper nutrition, and therapy helped me develop a presence that commanded respect rather than pity. Friends and acquaintances commented on how different I seemed, noting that I appeared more confident and self-assured than they had ever seen me. Jonathan advised me to avoid confronting my parents directly until after Tyler's wedding, when we could present our evidence in a coordinated legal action. This strategy required significant self-control, especially when my parents made particularly hurtful comments or demands. However, I understood that maintaining the element of surprise was crucial for maximizing the impact of our eventual revelation. The 2 weeks of preparation transformed not just my appearance and circumstances but my entire relationship with my family's dynamics. Instead of feeling like a helpless victim of their cruelty, I now saw myself as someone gathering evidence against criminals who had systematically abused and robbed me. The shift in perspective was empowering and helped me maintain emotional equilibrium even when they continued their manipulative behavior. By the day before Tyler's wedding, I had lost 20 pounds, rebuilt my professional reputation, strengthened my legal case, and developed an unshakable confidence in my own worth and capabilities. Most importantly, I had assembled a team of supporters including Catherine, Jonathan, and my therapist who validated my perceptions and supported my quest for justice. The scared, confused woman who had been excluded from family dinner 3 weeks earlier had been replaced by someone ready to fight back effectively. The morning of Tyler's wedding dawned crisp and clear, perfect weather for what everyone expected to be a flawless celebration. While my family was rushing around with last-minute preparations, I was taking my time getting ready for the surprise appearance that would change everything. After weeks of careful planning with Catherine and my attorney, the moment had finally arrived to begin exposing my family's years of deception and theft. I chose my outfit carefully for maximum impact. The navy blue dress I selected was elegant and sophisticated, perfectly fitted to show off the results of my recent weight loss without being inappropriate for a wedding setting. My hair and makeup were professionally done, creating a polished appearance that would shock family members who expected to see a broken, overweight disappointment. Every detail was calculated to project confidence and success. Catherine picked me up at 10 in the morning, 2 hours before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. She had been instrumental in planning this confrontation and would serve as both my emotional support and a key witness to the events that followed. Jonathan, my attorney, would arrive separately and position himself among the guests to observe and document whatever happened. We had rehearsed various scenarios and prepared for multiple possible reactions from my parents and Tyler. The drive to the church gave Catherine and me time for one final review of our strategy. We would enter together during the family seating period, taking our rightful places among the relatives despite my parents' attempts to exclude me. Catherine's presence would provide legitimacy to my appearance and make it difficult for my parents to remove me without creating a scene that would draw unwanted attention from other guests. As we pulled into the church parking lot, I could see my parents greeting guests near the front entrance. My mother was wearing a pale pink dress that I recognized as expensive, probably purchased with money from my stolen inheritance. My father stood beside her in his best suit, playing the role of proud father of the groom. Neither of them noticed our car as we parked toward the back of the lot. The transformation in my appearance was immediately apparent when we approached the church. Several family members who hadn't seen me in months did double takes, clearly surprised by how different I looked. My cousin Jennifer actually gasped when she recognized me, commenting on how beautiful I looked and asking where I had been hiding. The positive reactions from extended family members boosted my confidence and reminded me that my parents' assessment of my appearance had been motivated by cruelty rather than accuracy. My parents' reaction when they spotted me approaching the church entrance was everything I had hoped for and more. My mother's face went completely white, and my father's expression shifted from welcoming host to panicked conspirator in a matter of seconds. They clearly had not prepared for the possibility that I might appear despite being uninvited, and their lack of contingency planning was obvious in their fumbling attempts to decide how to respond. Tyler and Jessica were inside the church when Catherine and I entered, so they missed the initial shock of my arrival. However, word traveled quickly among the family members, and I could see people whispering and pointing in our direction as we made our way to seats in the middle section. Many relatives seemed confused about why my appearance was surprising, apparently unaware that I had been excluded from the guest list. My mother attempted to approach me with a forced smile, probably planning to quietly ask me to leave before the ceremony began. However, Catherine intercepted her with a warm greeting and a comment about how lovely the wedding decorations looked, effectively blocking any private conversation. My father hung back, clearly uncertain about how to handle the situation without drawing more attention to my unexpected presence. The church was filling with guests, including many of Tyler's college friends and Jessica's professional colleagues. These were the people my parents had been worried about impressing, the audience for whom my appearance would supposedly be embarrassing. Ironically, my polished appearance and confident demeanor were drawing admiring glances rather than the horrified stares my parents had predicted. As the ceremony time approached, I could see Tyler and his groomsmen taking their positions at the altar. Tyler's shock when he spotted me in the congregation was visible even from a distance. He clearly whispered something to his best man and kept glancing in my direction with a mixture of confusion and alarm. The disruption of his expectations was exactly what I had hoped to achieve. Jessica's family was seated in the front rows, dressed impeccably and radiating the kind of social confidence that had impressed my parents so much. These were successful professionals and business owners, the kind of people my parents desperately wanted to associate with through Tyler's marriage. Their presence represented everything my parents valued and everything they feared I would embarrass them in front of. My attorney Jonathan had positioned himself perfectly among the guests, close enough to observe and record whatever happened but not obviously associated with Catherine and me. His presence gave me additional confidence that everything would be properly documented for potential legal proceedings. We had prepared for various scenarios, from my parents attempting to have me removed to Tyler stopping the wedding entirely. The music began for Jessica's entrance, and all attention turned to the back of the church where she appeared in her elaborate wedding dress. She looked genuinely beautiful, and for a moment I felt a pang of sadness about what this day might have been under different circumstances. If my family had treated me with basic decency, I could have been celebrating this moment instead of using it as a platform for exposing their crimes. As Jessica walked down the aisle, I noticed several family members continuing to glance in my direction with curiosity and approval. Whatever stories my parents had spread about my mental health and appearance clearly hadn't prepared people for seeing me looking confident and healthy. The disconnect between their expectations and reality was creating exactly the kind of questions I wanted people to be asking. The ceremony proceeded normally despite the undercurrent of tension created by my unexpected presence. Tyler and Jessica exchanged vows while my parents sat rigidly in the front row, clearly struggling to focus on the beautiful moment they had planned while worrying about what I might do next. Their discomfort was visible to anyone paying attention, which made my revenge even sweeter. When the minister pronounced Tyler and Jessica husband and wife, the congregation erupted in applause and celebration. Everyone around me was genuinely happy for the couple, and I realized that my presence hadn't ruined anything for anyone except my parents and their co-conspirators. The wedding had been beautiful and meaningful, and my appearance had only added drama for those who deserved to feel uncomfortable. As the recessional music began and the wedding party started their exit march, Tyler made eye contact with me for the first time. His expression was unreadable, but I could see that my presence had rattled him significantly. Jessica remained focused on her grand exit moment, but I noticed her scanning the congregation and pausing when she spotted me among the guests. The ceremony portion of Tyler's wedding was complete, but the real drama was just beginning. As guests began filing out of the church toward their cars for the drive to the reception venue, I knew that the most important part of my plan was still ahead. The reception would provide the perfect setting for the revelations that would expose my family's crimes and permanently alter our relationships. The reception venue was everything my parents had dreamed of: an elegant country club with crystal chandeliers, white linens, and floral arrangements that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. As guests mingled during cocktail hour, I positioned myself strategically near the bar where I could observe my family's increasing anxiety while projecting calm confidence. Catherine stayed close by, ready to provide support when the moment for revelation arrived. My parents were clearly struggling to maintain their composure as hosts while dealing with the shock of my presence. I watched my mother approach several family members with forced smiles, probably trying to control whatever narrative was developing about my unexpected appearance. My father kept glancing in my direction with barely concealed panic, apparently realizing that my confident demeanor suggested I had something planned beyond simply showing up. Tyler and Jessica worked the room during cocktail hour, greeting guests and accepting congratulations on their beautiful ceremony. I noticed Tyler pointing me out to several of his college friends, probably explaining why his sister's presence was surprising. Jessica's parents and professional colleagues were enjoying themselves, completely unaware of the family drama brewing beneath the surface of this elegant celebration. The formal dinner portion of the evening proceeded normally, with guests seated at round tables decorated with flowers that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Catherine and I were placed at a table with distant relatives who seemed genuinely happy to see me and curious about what I had been doing lately. Their warm reception contrasted sharply with my immediate family's obvious discomfort. As the meal concluded and the evening moved toward the traditional speech portion of the reception, I knew my moment was approaching. Jonathan, my attorney, caught my eye from across the room and gave a subtle nod, confirming that he was ready to document whatever happened next. Catherine squeezed my hand under the table, providing silent encouragement for what we both knew would be a life-changing confrontation. The speeches began with Tyler's best man sharing amusing stories about their college friendship and Jessica's maid of honor offering heartfelt wishes for the couple's future happiness. My parents had not scheduled me to speak, obviously, but I had prepared remarks that would expose their crimes in front of everyone who mattered to them. The irony of using Tyler's wedding reception as the venue for this revelation felt perfectly appropriate. When the designated speakers finished their prepared remarks, the MC asked if anyone else would like to offer words for the happy couple. This was the opening I had been waiting for, and I stood up slowly, projecting confidence despite my racing heart. The room's attention focused on me as I made my way toward the microphone, with whispers rippling through the crowd about the unexpected speaker. My parents' faces showed pure terror as I approached the front of the room, clearly recognizing that they were about to lose control of the narrative they had so carefully constructed. Tyler and Jessica looked confused and alarmed, probably wondering what embarrassing family drama I might be about to unleash. The extended family and friends watched with curious anticipation, expecting typical wedding speech sentiments. Standing at the microphone with over 100 guests watching expectantly, I began by thanking everyone for their warm welcome despite my family's attempts to exclude me from this celebration. This opening immediately created tension and confusion among the guests, who had been unaware that there was any family conflict. My parents looked like they wanted to disappear entirely. I continued by explaining how much my grandmother had loved both Tyler and me, and how she had specifically structured her inheritance to ensure we both had equal opportunities in life. This seemed like a normal wedding speech reference until I began presenting the financial documents that proved my parents had stolen my entire inheritance to fund Tyler's advantages. The room fell completely silent as I displayed bank statements and legal paperwork on the projection screen. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable, showing systematic theft over multiple years and the use of my identity for fraudulent loans. I explained how every advantage Tyler had enjoyed, from his college education to his business startup funding to his engagement ring, had been paid for with money that legally belonged to me. The mathematical proof was clear and documented down to the penny. The reaction from the extended family was immediate and dramatic. My Aunt Susan, my mother's sister, audibly gasped when she saw the financial evidence and remembered my grandmother's explicit instructions about equal treatment. Uncle David, my father's brother, stood up and demanded an explanation for what he correctly identified as criminal fraud. The social humiliation my parents had feared was happening in real time. Tyler's expression showed genuine shock as he processed the evidence that his entire success story had been built on stolen money. His college friends and professional colleagues were witnessing the revelation that their accomplished friend had essentially been raised on the proceeds of family theft. Jessica's family looked horrified to be associated with people capable of such systematic fraud and abuse. The most devastating part of my presentation was sharing my grandmother's personal letters expressing her love for me and her specific concerns about my parents' favoritism. Reading her words about wanting to protect me from the family dynamics that might work against my interests brought many family members to tears and clearly established the moral foundation for her inheritance structure. As I concluded my remarks by announcing my intention to pursue both criminal prosecution and civil litigation for the theft and fraud, the room erupted in chaos. Several family members immediately approached my parents demanding explanations, while others surrounded me offering support and expressing outrage about what had been done to me. The elegant wedding reception had become a public tribunal. Tyler attempted to defend our parents by claiming they had acted in everyone's best interests, but his arguments crumbled when confronted with the documentary evidence and witness testimony from family members who remembered my grandmother's intentions. His attempt to minimize the situation only made him appear more complicit in the systematic abuse and theft. Jessica's family was clearly reconsidering their association with people capable of such elaborate fraud and cruelty toward their own daughter. I could see urgent conversations happening among her relatives as they processed the implications of what they had just learned. The social and professional connections my parents had hoped to gain through this marriage were evaporating before their eyes. Jonathan, my attorney, began collecting contact information from family members willing to serve as witnesses to my grandmother's intentions and my parents' suspicious behavior over the years. Several relatives offered to provide testimony about conversations they had witnessed or financial irregularities they had noticed but never questioned. The legal case was strengthening in real time. The revelation had accomplished everything I had hoped for and more. My parents' crimes were exposed in front of everyone they had tried to impress. Tyler's reputation was permanently damaged among his professional circles, and Jessica's family was questioning their association with criminals. Most importantly, the extended family now understood the truth about years of manipulation and abuse disguised as normal family dynamics. The immediate aftermath of my revelation was more dramatic than I had anticipated, with the elegant wedding reception transforming into a scene that would be talked about in our social circles for years to come. Within minutes of my presentation, several family members were on their phones, with my Uncle David actually calling the police to report the fraud while my Aunt Catherine contacted the district attorney's office about pressing criminal charges. Tyler's attempt to salvage the situation by claiming everything was a misunderstanding fell apart when additional family members began sharing their own observations about suspicious financial activities they had witnessed over the years. My cousin Michael revealed that my parents had asked him to lie to other relatives about Tyler's funding sources, and my Aunt Susan mentioned that my grandmother had specifically warned her about my father's tendency to favor Tyler unfairly. Jessica's reaction was swift and decisive in a way that clearly surprised Tyler. She immediately pulled him aside for an urgent private conversation, and their heated discussion was visible to everyone despite their attempts to keep it quiet. Her parents approached my parents demanding explanations about the criminal allegations, and their disgust was obvious when my father attempted to downplay the evidence as a family misunderstanding. The police arrived within 30 minutes of Uncle David's call, and their presence at the wedding reception created exactly the kind of public humiliation my parents had always feared. The officers reviewed the evidence I had prepared and determined that probable cause existed for arrests on charges of inheritance fraud, identity theft, and financial elder abuse. Watching my parents led away in handcuffs in front of their shocked guests was both satisfying and surreal. Tyler's wedding night was spent not in romantic celebration with his new bride, but in urgent consultations with family attorneys about his potential criminal liability as a beneficiary of stolen funds. Jessica's family made it clear that they considered the marriage a mistake and began pressuring her to seek an immediate annulment before their family name became associated with known criminals. The legal proceedings moved faster than I had expected, partly because the evidence was so overwhelming and partly because my parents' crimes had been so systematic and well documented. The district attorney's office treated the case as a priority due to the elder abuse component and the substantial amount of money involved. My parents were denied bail due to flight risk concerns. The civil litigation that followed was equally successful, with my attorney pursuing not just recovery of the stolen inheritance but also substantial damages for the years of lost opportunities and emotional trauma. The court ordered full restitution plus interest, punitive damages, and attorney fees, ultimately resulting in a settlement that exceeded $400,000. Tyler's business faced immediate consequences when his startup investors learned that their investment had been secured with fraudulently obtained funds. Several key partnerships were terminated, and his professional reputation in our city's business community was essentially destroyed overnight. The networking connections he had built through my parents' social circle evaporated as people distanced themselves from the scandal. Jessica's decision to pursue an annulment rather than divorce was based on her family's legal advice about avoiding association with criminal activity. The annulment proceedings were expedited, and their marriage was dissolved within 6 weeks of the wedding. The swift dissolution of what was supposed to be a lifetime commitment demonstrated how thoroughly my revelation had destroyed the foundation of their relationship. The extended family's reaction provided the validation I had craved for years, with multiple relatives apologizing for not speaking up about the obvious favoritism and suspicious circumstances they had witnessed. Many admitted they had suspected financial irregularities but hadn't wanted to create family conflict by asking difficult questions. Their support during the legal proceedings was both emotionally meaningful and practically helpful. The social consequences extended far beyond our immediate family, with the scandal becoming gossip throughout our parents' social and professional circles. My father lost his position on several nonprofit boards, and my mother was quietly excluded from the social organizations that had been central to her identity. Their dreams of enhanced social status through Tyler's marriage were replaced by public humiliation and social isolation. The financial restitution allowed me to pay off the debts my parents had accumulated using my identity and establish a substantial emergency fund for my growing business. More importantly, the legal victory provided emotional closure by officially validating my perceptions about the abuse and establishing consequences for my family's crimes. The court's findings confirmed that I had been systematically victimized rather than simply struggling due to personal failures. Tyler's eventual attempts at reconciliation were complicated by his continued refusal to fully accept responsibility for his role in the conspiracy against me. While he acknowledged that our parents' actions were wrong, he maintained that he had been an unwitting beneficiary rather than an active participant. However, the evidence of his participation in group chats mocking me and his support for my exclusion from family events contradicted his claims of innocence. The criminal sentences imposed on my parents were substantial enough to provide real consequences for their actions while still allowing for eventual rehabilitation. My father received 18 months in federal prison followed by 3 years of supervised probation, while my mother received 12 months plus community service requirements. The sentences sent a clear message that financial elder abuse and inheritance fraud would be prosecuted aggressively. The transformation in my relationship with the extended family was perhaps the most positive outcome of the entire ordeal. Relatives who had maintained polite distance due to my parents' influence now sought closer relationships with me, and several offered ongoing support for my business and personal endeavors. The family gatherings that followed excluded my parents but included me as a valued member for the first time in my life. The professional consequences for Tyler continued to unfold over the following months, with his attempts to rebuild his business hampered by the criminal association and his reputation for benefiting from family fraud. Several former college friends and business associates publicly distanced themselves from him, and his efforts to establish new professional relationships were complicated by the public nature of the scandal. The months following Tyler's wedding and my family's legal downfall became a period of profound personal growth and healing that taught me lessons I never could have learned while trapped in their toxic dynamics. The justice I had achieved through legal action was satisfying, but the real transformation came through rebuilding my identity and relationships based on truth rather than the distorted narrative my parents had imposed throughout my childhood. Therapy became an essential component of my healing process as I worked to untangle decades of gaslighting and emotional manipulation. My psychologist helped me understand how growing up as a scapegoat in a narcissistic family system had shaped my self-perception and relationship patterns. Learning about these dynamics gave me a framework for understanding my experiences and developing healthier ways of relating to others. The financial security provided by the legal settlement allowed me to make choices based on my values and interests rather than mere survival needs. I expanded my marketing consultancy into a full-service agency, hiring other freelancers and eventually establishing a physical office space. The business success felt earned in a way that contrasted sharply with Tyler's advantages, which had been purchased with stolen money. My relationship with the extended family continued to flourish as we all processed the revelations about my parents' behavior and worked to build connections based on honesty and mutual respect. Family gatherings became genuinely enjoyable experiences where I felt valued and included rather than criticized and excluded. Several cousins mentioned that they had always sensed something wrong with my family's dynamics but hadn't known how to address it. Catherine and I developed a particularly close relationship as she helped me navigate the practical and emotional challenges of rebuilding my life. Her willingness to take risks to support me during my darkest period demonstrated the kind of family loyalty I had never experienced before. Our bond became a model for what healthy family relationships could look like when based on genuine care rather than manipulation. The most difficult aspect of healing was learning to trust my own perceptions and judgments after years of being told that my understanding of reality was wrong. Therapy helped me recognize that my assessments of my family's behavior had been accurate all along, and that my emotional responses had been normal reactions to abnormal treatment. This validation was crucial for developing confidence in my decision-making abilities. Tyler's attempts at reconciliation forced me to establish boundaries about what kind of relationship, if any, we might have moving forward. While I felt some sympathy for the ways he had also been damaged by our parents' toxic dynamics, I couldn't ignore his active participation in my exclusion and humiliation. Any future relationship would require genuine accountability and changed behavior rather than simply acknowledging that our parents were wrong. My parents' release from prison created new challenges as they attempted to rebuild their lives while dealing with the social and financial consequences of their crimes. Their efforts to re-establish contact with me were complicated by their continued refusal to fully accept responsibility for their actions. They seemed to view the legal consequences as unfair punishment rather than appropriate responses to serious crimes. The business growth that followed my personal healing was remarkable in ways that validated my capabilities and demonstrated what I might have achieved years earlier with proper support instead of systematic sabotage. Client testimonials and industry recognition provided external confirmation that my professional struggles had been circumstantial rather than reflecting my actual abilities. Dating and forming romantic relationships became possible in ways they never had been before as I developed a clearer sense of my own worth and stopped accepting treatment that mirrored my family's dysfunction. Learning to recognize healthy relationship dynamics and communicate my needs effectively were skills I had never developed while focused on survival within my toxic family system. The most profound lesson from this entire experience was understanding that family dysfunction can be so normalized that victims don't recognize the abuse until they gain outside perspective. My parents' behavior toward me had been criminal, not merely unfair, but years of gaslighting had convinced me that I was overreacting to normal family dynamics. Speaking up and seeking justice had been the right choice despite the temporary chaos it created. Building a chosen family of supportive friends and healthy relatives proved more satisfying than trying to repair relationships with people who had demonstrated their willingness to abuse and exploit me. Quality relationships based on mutual respect and genuine care were far more valuable than maintaining connections with biological family members who treated me as disposable. The ripple effects of standing up to my family's abuse extended far beyond my personal situation as other relatives began questioning and addressing dysfunction in their own family relationships. Several cousins mentioned that my courage in exposing the truth had inspired them to set boundaries with manipulative family members and seek therapy for their own childhood experiences. Looking back on the journey from that devastating family dinner to my current life of independence and authenticity, I recognize that my parents' cruelest act, excluding me from Tyler's wedding, actually provided the catalyst for my liberation. Their attempt to erase me from the family narrative forced me to choose between accepting their assessment of my worth or fighting for my right to dignity and justice. The transformation from feeling like the family disappointment to recognizing myself as a survivor of systematic abuse changed every aspect of my life for the better. My relationships are healthier, my career is flourishing, and my sense of self-worth is based on reality rather than the distorted feedback I received from people who had their own reasons for keeping me small and defeated. My story demonstrates that toxic family dynamics can be challenged and overcome, even when they seem hopeless and unchangeable. Speaking truth to abusive power structures is always difficult and often temporarily chaotic, but the freedom and authenticity that result are worth the short-term disruption. Breaking generational patterns of abuse requires courage, but it creates possibilities for genuine happiness that would never exist within dysfunctional systems. The final lesson I carry forward is that real family isn't defined by blood relationships but by consistent patterns of love, support, and respect. My parents and Tyler forfeited their right to be considered family through their choices to abuse and exploit me, while Catherine and others earned that designation through their willingness to stand up for truth and justice when it mattered most. Have you ever been the scapegoat in your family or experienced similar favoritism toward a sibling? Let me know in the comments below because I love hearing your stories and connecting with others who understand these dynamics. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family dysfunction. Share this with anyone who might need to hear that they're not alone in dealing with toxic family members, and remember that your worth isn't determined by how family treats you. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it inspires you to stand up for yourself when you need to. You deserve relationships based on respect and genuine love, and you have the power to create the life you want regardless of your family's limitations.